I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're spreading our wings, taking flight, and probably burning down a village or two, as we rank the Soulsborne dragons from worst to best. Now I counted a total of 21 dragon fights after going through all the Soulsborne games, so I'm going to be splitting this list into two parts, with today's video tackling dragons 21 through 11, and next week being my top 10 dragon fights in Soulsborne. For the most part, most of the dragons in this series are really good to fight. The quality of the battles is much higher than you'd expect, so I'm looking forward to highlighting these fantastical fantasy beasts. Without further ado, part 1 of all 21 dragon fights in Soulsborne, ranked. And let me know which dragon fight is your least favourite down below. So, funny story, I was in the process of editing this video when I realised there was a boss fight I had completely forgotten about. But also rather fittingly, I'm placing it at the bottom of my list out of both pure spite and because it kinda fits. At number 22, we have the Ancient Wyvern from Dark Souls 3. Now, I've ranted about this boss many a time on the channel, as I personally feel it's the worst fight in Dark Souls 3, and an absolute waste of everyone's time, because at least with some of the other worst dragons in the series, you can actually call their boss battles a fight. Here, you're doing a platforming challenge to reach the tip of the Wyvern's head to get an instant kill. It's similar in mechanic to the Dragon God, except giving the Dragon God a rare positive, at least he can punch the player. If you die against the Ancient Wyvern, it's because you got killed by one of the large snake men enemies guarding the path upwards, not the Wyvern itself. It's a fight that feels like it was added last minute, as the level design of the boss arena ultimately wraps around to the next part of Archdragon Peak, which makes defeating this boss and then getting warped up there instead feel that much more jarring. But more than anything, this fight is forgettable, as evidenced by me forgetting to even include it in my rankings. If you're an Ancient Wyvern defender, I salute you, because I know what it's like to defend a boss that others think is trash, but at the same time, of all the hills you could pick to die on, you picked this one? To be quite frank with you, the bottom 3 fights on this list were all insanely easy to rank, because there are 3 very clear dragon fights in the series that just don't take advantage of the nature of their draconic purpose. And at the very bottom is one of the most boring fights in Soulsborne, it's the Ancient Dragon from Dark Souls 2. Whoever decided to make the optional dragon fight of the base game such a slog to deal with needs a talking to. We've just come from Dark Souls 1's DLC, where we get peak dragon content with Calamite, and here we're now dealing with a dragon that has an incredibly predictable couple of moves and a flame breath that can reach around the world with its insane distance. Run in, hit the dragon, run away when it flies up, pray you're far enough to avoid the flame breath it spews to the ground, rinse and repeat. The fight doesn't get any more complex than this, instead trying to supplement its difficulty via insane damage output. You can get 1-shot or 2-shot from any of the Ancient Dragon's attacks, which it makes sense from a lore perspective, you're fighting a gigantic dragon illusion, but it makes it miserable to fight, and in my opinion, gameplay needs to trump lore when it comes to the fun factor of a fight. Adhere to the lore as best you can, but don't make it a boss battle players aren't even willing to engage with. I never did this fight until my recorded playthrough this year, and I've been playing Dark Souls 2 since 2014. Thank God you can kill Vendrick without needing every single giant soul in the game, because if you get killed fighting this dragon, the boss run back going through the entire dragon area with every enemy aggroed onto you will certainly convince yourself to hang up your sword and say, "Fuck it, I'm gonna go get a Burger King and treat myself." Just avoiding the bottom spot, a fight I've spoken about often on this channel, and I can't keep his name out of my mouth. Hello to Demon Souls Dragon God. This draconic behemoth is found at the end of the Stonefang Tunnel Archstone, and after an intense battle against the Flame Lurker, you're expecting something truly grand for your potential first Archdemon. And the Dragon God being on the game's marketing in the opening cinematic and having an optional appearance if you beat the tutorial boss makes this fight one for the ages, or so you'd think. Instead, you're forced to deal with a mechanic that makes far more sense for the Latria Archstone: stealth. That's right, you don't actually get to fight the Dragon God. All the work has been done for you, with 2 ballistas set up along the arena that will handily paralyze the beast and allow you to deal the finishing blow. Because that's what you want from a dragon fight, right? A god whose only ability is to punch you into oblivion, right? Dragons are known for their punches, right? You have to creep around the arena, hiding behind pillars and breaking through barricades to reach the aforementioned ballistas, and once he's been hit by the pair, he slams down and you can hit his chin for a quick kill. But you have to do it all in one go. The fight resets after each attempt, so if you've mastered getting to the first ballista but are really struggling with the second, having to constantly redo that first section can be very tedious and dull. It's not really a fight, it's a level hazard. It's a gimmick. But at least it really nails the idea that these archdemons are far above normal humans and sells the horror of Demon Souls' world, alongside having a very simple boss run back. You hear that one, Ancient Dragon? And finally, rounding out the bottom trio of our list, we have the Guardian Dragon from Dark Souls 2, found at the end of Aldia's Keep. Now, compared to the last 2 fights, the Guardian Dragon is nowhere near as bad, a major step up, but doesn't really wow me when compared to the rest of the fights on this list. The Guardian Dragon is kept as a pet designed to stop anyone from accessing the Dragon Eyrie, and that sense of domestication has made the Guardian Dragon far less lethal than it wants to admit. If you've got spells, you'll be in and out of this caged arena in a flash, but if you're running a melee build, prepare for tedium. The reason why a majority of From Software's dragon fights work is because they have both flying movesets and ground movesets. No matter where you fight them, there's a healthy amount of moves they can pull out, and you're not spent waiting an age for a dragon to land so you can hit it for 2 seconds before it flies away again. The Guardian Dragon suffers here as, like its bigger brother Ancient Dragon, it has no ground moveset. It flies into the air, uses its flame attacks, lands, you get 2 or 3 hits in, rinse and repeat. There's no flow to this fight. It's not very dynamic, and especially when compared to the zoo of amazing dragon fights from Elden Ring we got last year, the Guardian Dragon just doesn't hold up. It's not an offensive fight. In a vacuum, it's not even one of the bottom 10 fights of Dark Souls 2. But when most dragon fights in this series sit near the pinnacle of their given games, the writing is on the wall. We're officially moving on to Elden Ring now, and I just want to quickly remind you all that I'm only considering dragon bosses with a health bar, so no Elder Dragon Grail on this list, and also no Dragonkin soldiers. They're not really dragons, they literally just kinned dragons. Bit obsessive, could have just got a dragon sonar and left it there, but what can you do? Our first real Elden Ring dragon is the Flying Dragon Grail, found on the bridge leading to the edge of Dragon Barrow. All of the field dragon bosses of Elden Ring have similar base movesets and abilities, but most of them have a unique move or evolve on previous iterations to keep themselves from becoming stale. Grail fails at that latter point, being the only dragon in this game that doesn't really follow that pattern. It's just Flying Dragon Agil, but placed on a narrow bridge arena instead of in a giant lake. He can fly up into the air and launch waves of fire, crash down towards you and torrent with his claws, and generally use all the swipes and slashes that every Elden Ring dragon has access to. His challenge comes from his damage output, which is relatively high and dangerous to a low-level player. Grail's arena also leaves only a small portion of space to move around in, which can be a hindrance or a help, as it makes the safe spots during Grail's flame attacks that much more obvious. Just hop on torrent, go back and forth, and you will take him down in no time. It's the dragon in this game that whelmed me the most, and doesn't have the perk of being the original of its type like Agil. There's not much else I can say. Moving on. On a small island to the west of the Academy of Rea Lucaria, a corpse sits holding a glintstone key. and guarding said corpse is the glintstone dragon Smaragd, our number 17 spot. Smaragd is a major step up from our previous entries, and represents a turning point in Elden Ring, as this is the first dragon you really do have to fight if you want to enter Raya Lucaria and progress the story. And on top of the usual suspects when it comes to his base moveset, Smaragd has a few glintstone sorceries up his sleeve to make the battle just that little bit more intense. And as long as you're on torrent, you can outrun them before they hit you, which is a lot of fun. I love that most of the dragons in Elden Ring really shake up their movesets as the game progresses, so you get a sense that you're really fighting different creatures. Smaragd has the entirety of the Leonian Lakes as an arena, which seems large, but its actual battle arena is relatively small, and you'll often find Smaragd flying too far away from his spawn and then warping back. This is one aspect of Elden Ring's dragon fights that kind of annoyed me, as when the dragons warp, it takes you out of your flow state completely, halting the action and forcing you to turn around and head back to the dragon's spawn to continue the fight. If Smaragd was the only glintstone dragon in Elden Ring, he'd likely rank a little higher, as I think a magic dragon is a fantastic concept. But then later in the game, we found another glintstone dragon with a far more expanded moveset I'll be touching upon next week, and thus comparisons had to be made, and Smaragd, I'm sorry, you suffered for it. You did nothing wrong, you just got unlucky. At number 16, we have the everlasting, immortal dragon of Dark Souls, Seath the Scaleless. Now, anyone who went back to watch my original Dark Souls boss rankings would know I do not like Seath. I think his character is intriguing from a lore perspective, but absolutely fails to be compelling once the chosen undead reaches him in-game. I'm not a fan of his god-awful boss run back that forces you to traverse the entirety of the Crystal Caves. I'm not a fan of his crystals that inflict curse damage on the player. And in Dark Souls 1, you could still get cursed after you died if your body stayed in those status crystals during the "you died" message, which was extremely fucked up. I don't particularly like the rest of Seath's moveset, as the normal crystals that emerge from the ground look extremely janky with really confusing animations, and his tail slams when you're trying to cut off the back one for the Moonlight Greatsword are extremely irritating, if effective, as one of the few moves that could easily kill me in a given playthrough. And yet I rank Seath above the last two Elden Ring entries because at least Seath is fully original. Grail was a reskin of Agil, and Smaragd is sadly overshadowed later in the game by Adula. My ranking is harsh in that sense, but there's nobody else in the series quite like Seath, for better or for worse. But from here on, we're officially leaving the territory of boss fights I hate or dislike, and moving into neutral and above. So let's say farewell to our bottom 6, goodbye Seath, I hope to never see you again, and let's hit up the second half of today's video, yeah? Viewer, you found me, I'm yours. And now that I've got your attention with a niche reference, I'm trying to reach 20,000 subscribers by summer of 2024, and you, yes you, can help. Look at how many of you aren't subscribed to the channel, so be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my latest rankings. Back to the video. What a shock, we're heading back to Elden Ring, as next up on our list is the dragon that likely horrified many players looking for Caelid's map fragment, Decaying Exeques. And whether I said that name right or not, I have no clue. I don't think anybody knows how to pronounce it. So I don't think anyone will be shocked that I decided to rank the dragon whose main gimmick involves inflicting scarlet rot lower on this list than the others. Because with how rare it is to create the boluses needed to cure said scarlet rot, getting inflicted is effectively a death sentence when it comes to Exeques, and he's right on the main road, so anyone rushing for Caelid's map is going to run into him. More than any other dragon boss, Exeques rewards proper positioning and careful movement. You need to stay underneath the boss, but not towards the front lest he uses poison breath to paint the town red. And then there's the massive AoE poison gas attack he can use below 70% health, which fills the arena with a scarlet mist. So if you're underneath him when he uses that, you're fucked, because even if you're a decent distance away, it can still hit you. The only way to avoid the onset of rot is to see it coming and bolt as quickly as you can. Maybe you'll succeed, maybe you won't, and it's that roll of the dice that has frustrated players for the past year and a half. The rest of his attacks are purely physical and the same that you've seen from other dragons: stomps, a fly up and slam down with the claws. Just hack away at those vitals and you will win the day. The difficulty feels artificial here, since it's based around my least favourite type of poison in Soulsborne, and can be very difficult to cure, making Exeeks number 15 on this list. I had to consult the ancient tomes known as Reddit to determine whether Osiris, the Consumed King from Dark Souls 3, counted as a dragon fight. After all, he doesn't have many similarities with most of the dragons we all know and love, what with his pale, anemic complexion, his spindly limbs, and lack of wings. But with his connection to Seath through his lore, and his appearance at least resembling that of the everlasting traitorous dragon, I'm allowing him on this list. And you know what? I was way too harsh on Osiris in my Dark Souls 3 ranking video. I actually think I put him too low on my list for personal reasons, stating I just didn't vibe with his fight, and to an extent, that is still true, but his battle is mostly well designed, featuring a fun Phase 1 moveset that is derived from Seath's battle but done right. My only issue with Osiris has always been how frenzied he gets in Phase 2, as he can sometimes hit you with such aggressive combos you can't fight your way out of. Those charge attacks are absolutely brutal. But then he uses Crystal Dragon Breath and freezing attacks, and I think, you know what? They put work into this fight, and his lore is even more intriguing. A consumed king driven mad by his desire to follow the path of the dragon, all to create a child of the dragon's ocelot, his proudest creation. The studies of Seath continue to drive those who worship him mad, from Big Hat Logan in Dark Souls, to the Duke of Brightstone Cove Seldora in Dark Souls 2, and now Osiris in Dark Souls 3. Neglecting his country and being driven mad, obsessed with harnessing his blood for a higher purpose. And then we come in and beat his senile ass up. Is Ocelot real? Is Osiris crazy? Maybe we should all go and watch a Vati Vidya video and find out. It's okay guys, it's okay, we're back to Elden Ring after that brief Dark Souls 3 pit stop. For our final 3 entries, we're not leaving, don't worry, and we're starting with Magma Worm Makar. Now for this list, I've consolidated all the Magma Worm encounters into Makar's entry, because while there are multiple found throughout the game, such as the one on Mount Gelmir and Great Worm Theodorix, I didn't see a change in moveset to warrant splitting them, and Theodorix's arena isn't unique enough to warrant its own entry like Grail and his bridge from earlier. But I really like the Magma Worms. They feel like an evolution of one of my favorite guilty pleasure bosses from Dark Souls 1, the Gaping Dragon. Makar initially appears from behind a central pillar and will immediately charge towards the player. Using his curved sword and magma breath, he is a force to be reckoned with. Phase 1 is like fighting a traditional dragon, complete with slams, tail swipes, a rather brutal charge attack, and even the ability to turn around and fire flames behind itself if you're attacking from the back. Then, at 50% health, Makar stands up on his hind legs, alights his sword, and begins attacking you with even more complexity. The sword swings become harder to dodge, the flame attacks spew even further, and hugging that booty becomes paramount. I just love that they designed this boss fight with 2 very unique looking states to the fight. They could have easily made the whole fight Phase 1, but they showed that the Magma Worms have a sense of intelligence once they stand up and begin fighting, almost like a humanoid. Given Magma Worms are created from creatures who partook in Dragon Communion to the point of being overcome by their instincts, maybe there's more truth to my theory than you might think. Is Makar going to be winning any medals for best fight ever? No, especially when I take into account the worm at Mount Gelmir, who for some reason is just one of the worst field bosses for me every time I play, but the worms are doing alright for themselves. Onwards to the mountaintops of the giants, as we introduce ourselves to a field boss with such a cool intro, Borealis the Freezing Fog. who coats the frozen lake it calls home with mist before emerging from said fog to terrify the player. This dragon, like all the others, shares a base moveset of classic swipes, tail attacks, flying up and down slamming attacks, and breath attacks. Only Borealis, of course, deals ice damage and the build-up of Frostbite. This status effect can be dangerous as Frostbite inflicts damage, lowers damage negation by 20%, and slows stamina recovery, so let's not let it proc. I actually found Borealis quite tough in terms of damage, as his Ice Breath hits extremely hard, to the point where you can easily find yourself getting 1 or 2 shot if you're not paying attention or feeling cocky. And unlike every other dragon in the game, you can't stick close to him because his roar does extreme Frostbite buildup and damage if you're too close. So you're forced to play a more conservative game, getting hits where you can, aiming for those back legs rather than the squishy head of the beast, and avoiding the Ice Breath when it breaks it out. And that's not taking into account that when it slams its legs down, the shock can also cause damage too. It shuts down melee and really forces you to keep your distance and time your hits well. Naturally, this means the boss is a bit tedious, but I can't help respecting that this dragon actually understands how to handle a Tarnished with too much time on their hands. It's the last field dragon you can find in the open world portion of the game after all, so I'm okay with the difficulty level being where it's at. With an amazing atmosphere and a level of challenge that made me think, oh okay, I see you, Borealis. It earns a middle of the pack finish from me. Last up on today's list, we have the first ancient dragon you'll likely encounter in Elden Ring. If you make your way up the ruined precipice to the Altus Plateau, you'll be greeted by a run-in with Ancient Dragon Lanciax. The ancient dragons, stemming from crumbling Farum Azula, are a brutal series of endgame dragons that can absolutely wreck your shit. And here one is, ready to fight you as you arrive on Altus for the first time. And it hits hard, but if you're persistent, you can do a small amount of damage that will cause Lanciax to flee. Because the true fight happens later in Altus as you're exploring closer to Lanedel's outer walls. Likely, you'll be leaving the hero's grave nearby and exploring the hills, when suddenly out from the sky drops that dragon you'd seen previously, Lanciax in all of their anger and glory. Red lightning crackles across Lanciax's scales, swiping at the ground as it attempts to claw you. Bolts of thunder slam down, illuminated by patches of static on the ground that you have to avoid as you roll through the dragon's legs. There's no point to using Torrent here, the horse will get killed quicker than you'd like, so only use him to close that distance and get back underneath Lanciax's hide. I was impressed at just how cinematic Lanciax's fight was, with the giant red bolts of energy it could fire at you, the design with the 4 wings that expand and intimidate, and yet my issue with this fight, and one that plagues not only Lanciax, but also the fights against the ancient dragons in crumbling Farum Azula, the camera. It's just not built to show the players what's going on. You can't fully react to the moveset of the boss when the camera can't even show you what the boss is doing. I'd love to see all these gorgeous and well-animated attacks, but instead I'm fighting with a camera that is trying its best to get me killed. Soulsborne cameras have never been the best, but I just feel it's at its most egregious when it comes to the ancient dragons, and Lanciax happens to be their scapegoat on this list. A great fight hampered by technological limitations. And that's it for today's list. It was a lot of Elden Ring, won't lie. I feel like I've thinned the herd down. So next week we can get into my top 10 dragons in Soulsborne, where all the heavy hitters are waiting. So be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my latest videos. My social links are on screen now as a dog barks outside, perfect timing. I'd recommend following me on my Twitter or my Blue Sky, but just follow where you feel comfortable. I also have a Discord, fun down there. Massive shout out to all of my patrons over on Patreon for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing, and I'm just really grateful to everybody for the support on this channel. So I'll talk to you guys next time. Adios.